This class will look at primary and secondary research. Decision makers require accurate and reliable information in order to make informed decisions. If the decision makers don't have accurate and reliable information, then they are forced to use their own judgments, which may be effective or it may not. But generally speaking, it's seen as preferable to have data and data that's processed into information to help them to make informed decisions. Data is gathered through primary and secondary research methods, and this is what we're going to talk about here, the precise difference between primary and secondary methods. The data itself is transferred from data into information by means of qualitative and quantitative techniques. So, for example, the company may collect facts and figures about its sales in a particular region. That's just numbers. And then it may process those facts, those numbers, using some sort of statistical technique and work out the trends of the sales in those regions and make comparisons between regions and between different products that are on sale and so on. And in processing the data, it's generated information. So information is what comes from the data after it's been processed. Now let's look at primary data. Primary data is first-hand data, and it's collected solely for its purpose. So primary data is data that's collected from source for a particular purpose. With regards to decision making, solutions are sometimes obtained through gathering primary data which is aimed specifically at the problem. So with regards to decision making, decision makers may make some effort to collect data directly, which is targeted entirely at helping them make a good decision. So the data they collect is solely for the purpose of helping them make a good decision. And that's often the case. The data may be collected in a variety of formats using questionnaires, focus groups, interviews, surveys, observations, and so on. And the data that's collected using these techniques, as I said earlier, is then transferred into information by means of some sort of processing, usually statistical or some sort of analytical process. Now, secondary data. Well, secondary data is data that already exists in different formats. It already exists. It's done for a different purpose. Probably the best example of this would be government statistics, which are collected on a variety of issues. For example, government collects data on industrial production. So the government's able to see which sector of the country is producing more, which sector is growing, which sector is declining. Now, as far as the government's concerned, it just collects the data. But companies can use that data. They could use the data to form a comparison of how well their company is performing vis-a-vis the national trend. So they could use the government statistics to benchmark their own performance. There are issues about reliability and validity of secondary data. It's important that secondary data must be reliable and must come from a good source, and it must do what it says. It must indicate precisely what it's attempting to do, what the data relates to, and it must be collected accurately. Clearly in the context of official statistics, government statistics, these are not an issue, but there are other sources of secondary data that may require more attention to ensure that the data is accurate. There are two types of secondary data that we need to concern ourselves with here. These are internal and external. So let's look at internal secondary data. Internal secondary data exists within the organization, and only the organization has access to the data, and it uses it for its own purpose. So companies are constantly producing data about its output levels, its productivity, the number of employees it's got, the unit costs it faces, and so on. It's got a lot of internal data. So the company is producing a lot of data. Now if we look at this by departments, for example, in the accounts department there are financial statements being produced, there are audits of expenditure and so on. There's information regarding stocks and inventory and financial data. So there's quite a lot of data within the accounts department. Now this data is collected for a specific purpose. The people working in the accounts department collect the data for a specific purpose. It could be to produce the final accounts of the business at the end of the year, which is a legal requirement. Or it could be to help management monitor a particular department or look at the performance of a particular product. Other departments, for example sales and marketing, also produce data. Sales reports, customer complaints and satisfaction surveys, market research reports. So it's a lot of data being produced by the sales and marketing department as well. And these are done for a particular purpose. So in that sense, anything collected within sales and marketing for a particular purpose, to show, for example, how satisfied the customers are with products, that is primary research. It's collected for the purpose of indicating how customers see the product. But that information could be used for secondary analysis as well. That information may form the basis of getting an overview of the performance of the business in the market and how it's performing vis-a-vis its competitors. So it's collected for a particular purpose, which makes it primary, but when it's used for an alternative purpose, it becomes secondary. Production and operations also produce a lot of data. Machinery and its efficiency, capacity, and flow charts of production. It's a lot of data in the production sector, and that data is collected to solve particular problems. It's primary data collected to solve particular problems within that department, but the data could also be used for some other purpose, perhaps planning investment or looking at some investment opportunity, in which case the data which is collected for the primary purpose of controlling production and monitoring production as it is now could be used to help a decision based on some future piece of investment. Human Resource Department also has a lot of internal data. Training programs, staff retention, turnover, exit interviews. There are many types of information that the HR department hold. And they hold this information because they need it. It's primary to them. But it could be secondary to the top management who need to make a decision about how many people they need and what sort of investment they're going to make in the future. Should it be labour-saving investment or labour-intensive investment? And so it can be secondary information, but secondary information that's based on a primary purpose. It was collected for the HR department to keep its figures, keep its records straight, and to indicate HR conditions within the organisation. Now let's move to external secondary data. This is simply data outside of the organisation, and as I mentioned earlier, one of the key sources could be government reports and government statistics. It could be local authorities, it could be the Chamber of Commerce or the Institute of Directors or some trade association. There are many sources, secondary sources of data. So data needs to be researched and obtained from external sources. Once the external sources publish their data, if it's in the public domain, then it could be used as a secondary source and processed using statistical techniques into information that companies could use. So it was collected as primary data by the organization who collected it, but once it's processed and used by companies, it becomes their secondary data. Books are a good example. Academics publish a lot of books and do a lot of research, primary research in many areas in business and social science and so on, and sometimes they make their data available, and this may be published in books, and it may be possible to use that data to draw comparisons and use it as a secondary source. But there are also journals. The internet, of course, is widely used for research, although many people are skeptical that some of the data on the internet may not be accurate. Marketing agencies produce data. Professional bodies, Chartered Institute of Marketing or Personnel, or the Chartered Institute of Accountants, or whoever, they sometimes produce data, show their primary sources of data, which could then be processed into secondary, or just sometimes the findings that they come up with in terms of their own research could be used as a benchmark, as a comparison for something that the company is doing itself. And of course, government statistics, as I mentioned earlier, is a big source of information that can't be overlooked. Now, quantitative and qualitative information. Well, quantitative, for a start, this is measurable. It's logical, it's data, it's quantitative, so it's possible to count up, add, subtract, multiply, work out percentages, work out trends. So it's quantitative information. People's views and opinions are measured through statistical and numerical data. Results can easily be translated through processes such as graphs and charts. So sometimes statisticians have found ways of measuring people's attitudes. Do you like this product? How much do you like this product? Do you like it a lot? Not so much? It's okay? It's not too good? It's terrible? I dislike it. So we have a scale in which we can measure people's attitudes, sometimes known as the Likert scale. But there are issues about using scales which makes them debatable. But nonetheless, there is an effort in moving from looking at what is inside the person, the attitude that's within the person, and trying to get a quantitative fix on that. So there are approaches that are trying to get deeper understanding of situations through quantitative analysis. Generally speaking, the information that's derived from quantitative data is easy to look at, and it's easy to understand at some levels. It may be presented as a graph or as a chart, and generally speaking, once the data is collected, the quantitative data is collected, it can be processed into information using statistical techniques, and providing they are applied accurately, the processed information is reliable. It's based on the data. Examples of quantitative methods include surveys, closed questionnaires, experiments, observations. So there's a wide source of information that can be tapped into, a wide source of processes and approaches that can be tapped into to generate quantitative information. Qualitative, well, unlike quantitative information, which relies on numbers and statistics, qualitative information is focused on meaning and opinions. Qualitative is what's our opinions, what are our attitudes towards particular situations. It's much more descriptive, therefore it's difficult to quantify. It's our opinions, and as such it's difficult to get a measure. How strongly do we feel about a particular situation? We may dislike something, but do we dislike it intensely or just dislike it a little? So the information is not very reliable in that sense, but it can be valid. It can be true, can relate to the situation. It may mean that the people are unhappy with some particular situation, but their depth of feeling is not easy to work out. The methods used for qualitative information collection include open questions and questionnaires, focus groups, observations, interviews, case studies. For example, in a focus group, a group of people are invited to give their opinions. A facilitator will ask questions and they will debate the issues, but the intensity of the feelings and the outcomes may be somewhat vague. There may be an overall impression that the people participating did not like something or they did like something, but the depth of feeling is difficult to measure. Now, the impact of all of this on decision making. Well, organizations generally try to combine qualitative and quantitative research in order to obtain valid and reliable results. And what they're trying to do is make good decisions. So they try to not just pick up data and hence information in one direction, they try to pick it up in a variety of directions. This is sometimes known as triangulation. You try to get the same information but collecting data in different ways. Secondary data, primary data, interviews, observations, focus groups, statistical techniques. So it's, if all of them are suggesting the same, then the decision making can be made with more confidence. So there are issues about making decisions and how much information is required before a decision should be made. But generally speaking, decision makers try to have as much information from different perspectives as they can get, because that makes the decision making somewhat more reliable. Generally speaking, quantitative information is favoured over qualitative, simply because the results can be measured and it's possible to model the information statistically. So it's Generally speaking, quantitative information is seen as more reliable. In decision making, qualitative information requires management judgment and experience rather than mathematical modeling. So with qualitative information, experience and good decision makers with experience, good decision makers who are aware of all the factors, or as many factors as is reasonable, these managers have to interpret the results of qualitative data collection before they make the decision. But of course they may get it wrong. Whereas with quantitative, once the numbers have been collected and processed into information using some sort of statistical model, that indicates whether it's good or bad. So we have different approaches to data. We have primary and secondary sources of data, and then we have quantitative and qualitative data. The whole idea is to make good decisions and find appropriate data that may be processed into information which will help the decision maker make effective decisions. So that's all I'm going to do in this session. I'm going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.